I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Ling, who's Associate Professor in the Graduate Programme in International Affairs here at the New School, in the New School for Public Engagement. Dr. Ling's research focuses on developing a post-Westphalian approach to world politics through notions of multiple worlds, or worldism. She's the author of 3 books and almost 50 articles and book chapters. And from 2008 to 2010, Dr. Ling was a faculty fellow with the India-China Institute here at the New School. And she's currently working on a manuscript with other India-China Institute fellows titled Rethinking Borders and Security, India and China Now, New Connections for Ancient Geographies. So I'll pass over to Ling. Thank you.
I'm afraid that I have the least developed paper of all of the papers presented today. I have no fancy PowerPoint, no even paper. I just have what you have. And I could blame it on the fact that I am a co-organizer along with Hazel of this workshop, but I can't because Hazel did most of the work. And so I don't even have that excuse. My real excuse is that I'm playing around with an idea, and I thought that perhaps this workshop could help me, and perhaps it might inspire you to pursue different aspects of this idea. Just to give you context, last year in Montreal, I did present a fully written paper that looked at Karl Lagerfeld, and Andreas was very kind to produce some clips from the Lagerfeld interview and the film that he produced. And I used Karl Lagerfeld as an example of how creative thinking in the fashion industry could help international relations practitioners, policymakers, and scholars think more creatively. And Lagerfeld did this by being self-satirical. He was making fun of himself, and he was making fun of others like him. But of course, he had a more deft touch to his humor. Others would actually be serious about how they think they know China or Chinese or the other, the non-Western other, through their own imaginaries. Lagerfeld was acutely aware of this and made fun of it. And if you were to look at his film, which is easily available on YouTube, you can't help but laugh hysterically at how campy the whole thing is. He has, white actors playing Chinese people, and even, white actors playing the Chinese emperor and the Chinese empress. So it's ridiculous. But in his ridiculousness is a message which is, let us not take ourselves so seriously, because we really don't know what we think we know. All we know is what has been put in our minds. And somebody, I would say, like Neil Ferguson, could take that message more to heart, because he is serious about what he thinks he knows. For those of you who don't know who Neil Ferguson is, he was a once obscure Scottish historian who was plucked by Harvard to become a high muckety-muck professor of history. And he is currently producing all sorts of documentaries, first about civilization, and now today on BBC, he is showing a documentary on China. And it's full of the stereotyping that the literature has been talking about, Orientalism and all that. And unfortunately, I spent last weekend obsessively reading his book, Civilization, thereby not writing this paper, because I was amazed that in the year 2011, a book like that could still be published, and he has been assigned or appointed to become the formal historian counselor. What is it? The form advisor to the government on history curriculum in Britain. And this is a guy who supposedly writes about history, but when it comes to the history of the Opium War, one of the most devastating events to happen in the East Asian sphere, he has only 2 lines. He said, the British, the English, he said, not even the British, the English were luckier in their drugs. Of course, they had alcohol, but they had coffee from Arabia to wake them up, tea from China, and tobacco from the New World. So they are able to select their commodities however they want to wake themselves up. The Chinese, on the other hand, opted for lethargy with opium in their pipes provided by the British East India Company. Ha, ha, ha. And so I, of course, wanted to throw this book across the room, but I had to finish reading it. And then the other line that he had about the Opium War was that it was triggered by an overzealous Chinese official. And he didn't even name the official, Commissioner Ling, who was one of the heroes of Qing China, who took it upon himself to try to stop the opium trade. And my friend and colleague Marianne Franklin tells me that these are the terms, or was it you, Sharon? No, it was Marianne who told me that she read these same things as a child in New Zealand, reading high school or even middle school text, high school text that said exactly the same thing. So Ferguson is trying to reproduce this line of history for the current generations, because he says the decline of the West will come when we, the world, forget what makes the West so great. And that's why he wrote this book. Of course, it's written from a Western perspective to other Westerners. Lagerfeld makes fun of all of this, and he makes fun of this in an elegant, insouciant way, where, in his ponytail and dark glasses and fan, he's saying, oh, come on, don't be so serious. For my talk today, I wanted to invert the perspective a little bit. Whereas in my paper last year, I showed what fashion had to offer international politics, I wanted to talk about what international politics or the field of international relations has to offer fashion. And that is in the realm of a structural logic. And I apply the structural logic in particular to the global problem of anorexia nervosa, which is spreading throughout the world, just as Western industry has spread throughout the world. And the structural logic comes from Marx's contribution to political analysis, which is that there's a relationship between the way we think and the way we organize our lives. Marx placed this in terms of historical materialism, that the farmer, the minute he put his hoe into the earth, he is starting political economy. Well, what I want to suggest is that we can draw from this logic to understand the fashion industry and anorexia. There is a structural logic to mainstream fashion such that, of course, clothes look better on a hanger. Clothes don't look better on a natural body. And for this reason, models and consumers have been thinning themselves to fit the clothes. And the designers have been designing clothes that come closer to the body over the years, so that now we have a lot of fashion which directly exposes the body by what I call the Victoria's secretification of fashion, which is to wear your underwear outside. Therefore, it is inevitable that there will be anorexia all over the world, in whatever society, whatever culture, wherever there's a Gap or Chanel, there will be anorexia, because the clothes are designed for the non-human body. It's designed for a hanger. Now, what to do about this, given the fact that this is a structural logic that comes from the political economy of clothes, and there's a huge industry, money, capital behind the production of these kinds of clothes? How can we address this? Now, the previous paper suggested that there are alternative logics being presented in how we look at clothes, how we look at our bodies. But I would propose that even though these are important sites of intervention, they are not enough, because there isn't the political economy behind these ideas to support them. And in fact, given the current way in which the global political economy works, it's very likely that these ideas will be appropriated And we will have very high fashion, high-priced clothing that claims to be natural, claims to be blah, 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 but which are just like Chanel or Lagerfeld or whatever. And so what I'm thinking as a project that maybe we could embark upon is to look at how third world economies have been dealing with first world fashion. And here I draw inspiration from countries like India, where there are sewers in department stores to help adjust the clothing that you buy. And there is still a very lively custom tailoring industry in economies like India's, and we could talk about Thailand as well, where there are still means of producing clothing to fit your body instead of constantly working your body to fit the clothes. And given the fact that there's no way that powerful political economies like Chanel, like Louboutin will go away, perhaps we can think of a way in which we can integrate these local economies of sewers and custom tailoring with the larger global political economies of the fashion industry, such that clothes that look great in magazines can be made to fit your body as well, so that there isn't this constant attempt to fit your body to the clothes. This is, an idea. It might be fanciful, it might be idealistic, but it is an attempt to bring two structures together, not necessarily to battle the logic of fashion, but the logic that fashion produces, which is ever-thinning bodies, and therefore disease and illness among a vast majority of people. And perhaps in bringing these two structures together, we could create the logical space for the ideas, the subversive ideas that were being talked about earlier. And that is my talk. Thank you.
I don't know whether anybody wants to ask questions. They're welcome. But one thing I would say to you, Lily, is we've got one of our MA fashion studies, the first cohort that's completing. They're just completing their theses at the moment. And Lauren Downing has been writing on what she calls fashionistas. In other words, women who are beyond what is considered the body norm of fashion. And she's actually been doing some case studies and some very interesting work. So that's the here and now in the United States. And we've already got lots of questions. So, Andreas, I think you were first.
Okay, thank you. Clothes, what fashion is made for hanging. One question and one comment. The question is, if we combine this with a political economic perspective, that seems to be very popular today, to whom do we sell that? That doesn't seem to quite follow. Isn't that sort of exaggerated? Second, I recently accompanied a female colleague of mine to London on Bond Street, and we tried on some things for her at Chanel, and they actually worked on her. At a minimum, we need to distinguish between couture and all the conceptual stuff and the pret-à-porter stuff, which is actually sold to people to wear this kind of stuff, which is where the bulk of the money then also comes from. So there's a slight oversimplification of the performance. Third point, jackets for men, if they are tailored well, are actually tailored so that they look good on the man's body and not on the man as a way to contribute.
Well, we all know that male fashion has escaped the plague of female fashion, which is anorexia, precisely because male fashion has always been handled differently. There has always been a lot of custom tailoring for male fashion in contrast, even for ready-to-wear clothes than for female fashion. And what was your point about?
For the hanger, we can't sell it. So from a political economic point of view, we have to make sense of it.
What do you mean you can't sell it? That is how they are selling it. What are you talking about? Models have been getting skinnier and skinnier, and this relates to your second comment about haute couture, how it's always custom tailoring. But haute couture provides the image, the design, the ideal, the aspiration. And as they've studied this, the models since the 1950s have gotten skinnier and skinnier, so that now they even have anorexic models. I mean, there's a picture of an anorexic model on our poster. So of course they're selling it.
Marianne, you were next.
You just to there's a big hoo-ha in Holland at the moment, the Netherlands, about the top supermodel. What's the show? Supermodel? You know, the new
America's
top model.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, so many reality shows. The woman who won it, last year's model, they get promised a big contract, you know, and a foothold in the industry. She did not get the full terms of her prize because her hips are too big. And she's taken the program makers to court. Because there's a measure just throwing open this can of worms about the zero science model. I don't know if she's going to succeed, but I'm sure some deal will be made out of court. But so models and some of the young women themselves starting to sort of say, hang on a minute.
Sure, I think
Yeah, really interesting start of a bigger project. Obviously, your mind is worrying away. But I was also thinking about the issue of labor. And I think there's a lot of work being done in terms of the kinds of labor, right? So body as embodied labor, but also affective labor, and also then I was wondering whether the different elements of this conversation that I've been hearing today, and I'm completely an outsider to this in some respects, that the bringing in of labor, whether it is producing the clothes that are being worn, or it is the labor that goes into making our bodies thinner, could be one way of stitching together,
so to speak,
different aspects of it. And I think that in a way, the political economy perspective, which of course, Andreas thinks is too much, but I think it is at the heart of it, because fashion is reproduced only because it reproduces the capital which is invested in it. Otherwise, it won't be the power it is in some extent, to some extent. And I think that sort of, the relationship between couture and the high street is really about how that imaginary is translated for the everyday. And the power of imaginaries is our ritualized understandings of ourselves in the everyday. It's not about that we think that we will be princesses, but that in our everyday, our dad and mom will make us princesses for the day, for birthdays, for weddings, all those kind of. So I think that the labor element could be one sort of way of stitching.
Yes, and I precisely thought about the labor element when I thought of bringing together the industry of high fashion or legitimate fashion or global corporate fashion and the industry of sewers and tailors, right? Because currently the industry of sewers and tailors is minimized or devalued because the real value is with these fashion houses, shall we say. And so these tailors, they eke out a living making, cutting patterns from Vogue or whatever. But if we integrate these two industries, and in particular convince global corporate fashion houses to integrate these industries, they would provide better wages for the tailors, better status, better standing. And we wouldn't have the kind of sweatshop labor that we currently see, because corporate global fashion houses rely on these sweat house labor to produce their fashions at the kind of prices that they think the market will bear. But instead we bring together these two industries.
Francesca.
At this point, I think in relating your idea of like sort of the Chanel and how it is then negotiated through costume tailoring, I think a great example is modest dressing. And without going into too far, and if you think about the Orthodox Jewish community in New York, a lot of them are quite affluent, so they do buy Chanel, but they really sort of then not only make the leaves longer and longer, there's also body type issues that come up generally. But also I think I've heard, and this is something that Pret-a-Porter company, not only couture is making a specific kind of clothing for the sort of Eastern market that is different. I'm sure that a huge sort of costume dressing there, which negotiates it very should not, because obviously all your body type is
when I went to Malaysia and India and these countries that still have a very strong custom tailoring tradition, I noticed that women there have much less issues about their bodies than women in other parts of Asia or of the West that rely almost completely on these corporate fashion houses. Because in Islamic dressing, for example, you have to observe certain rules, but that doesn't mean they're not fashionable. They're extremely fashionable. And if you look at Malaysian fashion magazines, you would be amazed at the imagination that is shown there compared to the standard fashion houses. They can't compare. But at the same time, these women are able to bring together really fashionable fabrics, designs, etc., while observing religious strictures, and that is fine. So I think that there is room for negotiation between the extremes. It's not necessary for us to reject global corporate fashion because it's here and it's powerful. It's got a lot of money. What I suggest we do is co-opt them.
Question at the back.
No, I just wanted to agree with you and just point out that maybe perhaps the integration is happening because of all these e-commerce customized websites that have even, I don't know the name, but have even come to the detailing of, oh, this person made this and this was made in this state. And yeah, I'm very interested in that because I'm interested in custom design. But and also there is a company and not based in here, but for Indian brides that order their dresses, custom made, and the industry is in India, and then they can go and meet there. So
but these are still niche markets. What I'm suggesting is that we mass produce them.
Right, and I agree, and I think that.
Well, I forgot to mention that one of the reasons I decided to take the structural approach is because the current methods used to deal with anorexia are completely ineffective. They either individualize the problem by saying this individual has problems and therefore needs therapy, or people indict Western influences and culture as the culprit, which again is ridiculous because the Western influence is here, it's global, or they just make general comments about capitalism as a machine of desire. We all know that, but we need to go beyond these abstract condemnations and look at how pragmatically we can organize what is already existing in order to deal with the gaps and the illnesses that the current situations produce. I'm going to answer your question later. I'm going to.
There's one question here.
Yes. Actually, one comment that I wanted to make. Actually, I probably have two comments. But as far as like designing for the hanger, I have a feeling that probably came into being even more so in the 80s as flat pattern making and then pad design really started to move in, and the whole idea of draping was basically got dropped to be draping. So, prior to that, draping was still a part of the industry, at least at the beginning stages. Thus, we end up with you design for the hanger because you're only working one-dimensionally all the time. Then, this idea that you have this idea for the project, partially, what you were saying as far as, what's starting to develop as a niche industry. It's sort of a question, but I'm also, I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens because of the amount of migration we have going on right now, even more so, I could say, than in the past. That the influences of other types of dressing, we were talking about whether or not it was modest dressing, where there's a lot of draping, and where it does take the body into consideration much more so, whether or not that will start to influence the market to an extent, and if so, when. I find it hard to believe, or I find it hard to see when I look at people walking down the streets of New York City, but...
Yeah, especially since Victoria's Secret has such a big impact. Not only on underwear, but outerwear.
I just want to, I feel especially asking a question because I've just arrived. I didn't indicate earlier talks, but I think I agree that there is by now a kind of global market that has an enormous impact. But I think what we're forgetting is that it didn't take a global market of capital is the balmy plates inserted. I mean, you know, women really are, have been and continue to be, I think, to some extent, the model that is created for other reasons than economic ones, more status ones, if I go back to Thorsten Devlin, to prove that the family that has such deforming effects on women so that they can't work, therefore are raising their own status because they are part of the leisure class. They can afford to have. They're the 1% of the task. And I think that with the kind of Marxian analysis of political economy, I think it works very well now because we are in a global world, and everything else that I've mentioned has been a particular cultural pattern, some of which are still in existence. Some of them have really gone out of, I won't say out of fashion, but they don't exist anymore. So that would be one of my worries if we go completely into this idea. I also want to mention that if you are a part of the 1% instead of the 99%, if you go to Bergdorf Goodman, your clothes will be made to fit you.
Yes.
Be made to
Right.
fit the clothes.
Right.
And that's not the only shop that has
Right. I mean, that's
customized clothes.
That-
And the last thing I want to say is the most recent New York Times fashion for men that I saw has these men looking absolutely anorexic.
Yes.
Something they've
Yeah.
seen.
Right.
Either that or they're 14 years old.
Right. Let me underscore that clearly all patriarchal societies have abused women through dress or other ways. I'm not saying that the anorexia that we see today is the only kind of abuse on women's bodies that occurs. What differs the current situation from previous situations is that this is a global problem, that the proportion or the weight or the scale of this problem far exceeds any other kind of cultural eccentricities that one may observe anthropologically. So yes, Chinese women had their feet bound for a long time, but that was illegalized in the early 20th century, right? So the kind of atrocities that we're talking about pale in comparison to this global problem of anorexia. In India now, anorexia among young girls of urban middle class and higher is spreading, it's rising in a country that is afflicted with malnutrition for 60% of the population. It's unimaginable a generation ago. So we have to consider the scale of the problem and not just be anthropologically fair, so to speak. And yes, the structural logic of fashion is also affecting men's fashion. And it is slower to sort of catch up because of the kinds of custom tailoring that had been occurring in the past. But men today have cosmetics. Men today are getting manicures and pedicures, and they're going to spas to lose weight and all that because the same kind of fashion logic is being imposed on them. Because the structural logic of corporate fashion is to create ever more markets. And regarding the 1%, yes, of course, the 1% has always had their clothes custom made. That's what haute couture is all about. What I'm suggesting is that we mass produce this structural incentive for people to have their clothes custom made so that they are not subject to fitting their bodies to the clothes. So that we can have this change in thinking, in relationship between ourselves and our clothes.
I think there are about 4 more questions, then we'll move on. At the very back corner.
You know, I was talking to a young Occupy Wall Street who got arrested yesterday. And I was telling him, like, this has been going on for a long time. You had ACT UP, you had Black Panthers, you had, in fact, the very people on Wall Street were the ones, the hippies, and now they're on Wall Street. You shouldn't pay attention to that. Independent music, do we really want to see Clive Davis anymore? No. your own music, your own radio station, grow your own food, and make your own clothes. That's what I said to them. If you really want to do something, that's what you should be focusing on. And you guys have the money, the brightness to do it for the first time. That's what I would do, I told him. And he said, you know, you're right. My grandmother made all of her own clothing. This was the sharpest dressed woman in church. Because she made it because she didn't have money. So why people can't make clothes because make clothes because they have money? Then I'm confused because as she was saying, Michelle was going around telling everybody fat. You know what I mean? There's a fat woman conference every other week. So I don't know which way to go. The guys, they're wearing the pants hanging off their body, which is catch fire around the world. I've heard rap in every language. And the clothes go with it. So I am really very confused. Girls like me have never been interested in what you're talking about. And there's many like me, who of course will never represent the black female or any other female, maybe the grunge female, I don't know. But the point is I think that people make too much of this. I think that in America itself, like I said, there are many women who really have never paid attention to this. My heroes were also very glamorous. Katharine Hepburn, she's one of my favorites. She did make her own clothes. And she didn't have as many clothes as you would think. She'd go and get her suits tailored, her men's suits, she'd get 3 or 4 of those every season, you know. And the gowns all belonged to Hollywood. They made that for her, so when she went out and did, but her thing was different. You know, so I'm very confused. And then that guy with the glasses, the fashion designer, old guy with the glasses and the ponytail, he said, well, Adele's very pretty, because he was looking for, I don't know, I guess someone to promote. He said, Adele's very pretty, but she's too fat for anything. She went and won 6 Grammys, you know. Some women like being fat, you know. Do what you want to do.
Yeah, of course we all celebrate that attitude, but that attitude is either you are very well grounded in yourself, which you seem to be like, and you're very lucky. But there are others who are not in that kind of environment, don't have that kind of temperament, and what we want to provide is that kind of structural environment such that if they look like Adele, they can still feel comfortable and look beautiful, and not feel like they have to be subject to Lagerfeld's judgment that they're too fat. So, you know, all I'm suggesting here is that we mass produce an industry that allows people to feel comfortable with their bodies and their clothes. And as to your comment about why is it that people don't make their own clothes anymore, they don't have time because of the nature of the economy these days. One of my best hobbies as a student was to make my own clothes. I can't do that now. I don't have the time.
It's too expensive.
Yeah, and it's very expensive.
I wonder if we can just hold the rest of the questions till 5 o'clock, because this is obviously one theme. Well, this is not one theme, but there are a lot of elements of this theme that are obviously catching our imagination. And I think that would be great if we could just keep those thoughts in mind.